The young and the restless spoilers in the dim glow of a moonlit night, hope was a fragile thing that seemed to hang by a thread. Phyllis and Sharon had long ceased to expect a miracle, yet somewhere deep inside, a spark of determination urged them onward. Their hearts pounded in unison as they sat, shackled by the weight of captivity and despair, yet still clinging to a glimmer of freedom. In the silence of their imprisonment, their minds had been racing with escape plans, desperate measures, and the burning desire to reclaim their lives. But despite every effort, each attempt at escape had been thwarted by barriers too formidable to overcome, until that fateful moment. Phyllis, a woman renowned for her strength and indomitable spirit, refused to surrender. With a surge of raw determination, she seized a heavy chair that lay discarded in the corner of their cramped confinement. Without hesitation, she swung it with all her might toward the window. The impact shattered the fragile glass, sending sharp fragments scattering into the cold air. In the sudden flash of broken light, both women were startled to see beyond the confines of their cell, a glimpse of a long-forgotten hospital corridor, abandoned and cloaked in darkness, lay just beyond the wreckage of the window. It was as if fate had offered them a narrow passage to salvation, a narrow corridor that whispered promises of freedom amid the bleakness. Phyllis and Sharon exchanged a determined glance. Their eyes, momentarily closed to shield themselves from the jagged shards of reality, held a silent vow to escape at any cost. With adrenaline coursing through their veins, they scrambled over the debris and bolted into the abandoned corridor. The hallway was a ghostly remnant of better days, its peeling paint and crumbling walls hinting at a past filled with care and purpose. Now, however, it was reduced to a labyrinth of shadows, where every step resonated like a drumbeat of defiance. The silence was oppressive, punctuated only by the distant echo of their hurried footsteps and the persistent whisper of wind through broken windows. They pressed forward, their minds focused solely on the distant door at the corridor's end, a door that, in their eyes, was the final threshold between captivity and the promise of freedom. As they neared the door, memories of the harrowing days spent in captivity began to recede, replaced by the warmth of reunion waiting on the other side. They envisioned the tight embrace of summer, the heartfelt hugs of Mariah and Faith, and the comforting arms of everyone who had longed for their return. Every obstacle, every moment of terror, now seemed small compared to the overwhelming joy that awaited them. With one final burst of energy, they flung open the door and stepped out into a world that, despite its scars, radiated the bright light of hope. Outside, the cool night air enveloped them, and the noise of the city's heart, the murmur of distant voices, the hum of streetlights, welcomed them back into its fold. Phyllis and Sharon, battle-worn yet unbowed, were immediately met by those who had never given up hope for their safe return. Summer, her eyes glistening with tears of relief, wrapped her arms tightly around her mother. Mariah and Faith joined in, their embraces speaking volumes about the anguish of separation and the elation of reunion. In that moment, it became painfully clear that the days of enforced hatred and relentless vengeance were behind them. Having come face to face with the terror of their own mortality, they recognized the futility of bitterness and the destructive nature of enmity. Locked in a tender embrace, Phyllis and Sharon shared whispered promises and tearful vows to leave behind the past, to forsake the long-held grudges that had once pitted them against one another. Their whispered confessions of forgiveness and their commitment to change resonated like a healing balm, soothing old wounds and forging a new bond, a bond born out of shared suffering and the hard-won lessons of survival. They promised to support one another in the days to come, united not only by their ordeal but also by the realization that life was too precious and fragile to be marred by endless conflict. Yet, amid the joy of their reunion, a persistent question loomed large: who was the true mastermind behind their kidnapping? The mystery of their abduction was as complex as it was unsettling. Why had the kidnapper chosen not to keep Phyllis and Sharon as permanent prisoners? The fact that they had been released, albeit under harrowing circumstances, suggested that the abductors' motives were far from straightforward. There was an undeniable undercurrent of calculated risk, a hidden agenda that hinted at broader, more sinister schemes at play in the shadows of Genoa City. In hushed conversations that followed, theories circulated among their rescuers. Some speculated that the kidnapper had intended to use the women as bargaining chips, pawns in a larger game of power and retribution. Others whispered that the abduction was part of a psychological stratagem designed to break their spirits, to force them into a position of vulnerability that could be exploited later. Yet, even as these theories swirled like autumn leaves in a turbulent wind, one thing was certain: the abductor had orchestrated everything with a level of precision and audacity that was both chilling and awe-inspiring. As the newly freed women were escorted to a safe haven, the collective relief of their supporters was palpable. But the celebration was tempered by the realization that this was only a temporary reprieve, a brief intermission in an ongoing saga of deception and power struggles. In the aftermath of their escape, questions persisted. What did the abductor intend to achieve? Was this a test of loyalty, a challenge to their resilience, or a prelude to a more profound upheaval in the power dynamics of Genoa City? For Phyllis and Sharon, the experience had been transformative. The ordeal had stripped away the layers of animosity that had long separated them, revealing the shared vulnerability that lay beneath. With each passing moment, the remnants of old hatred dissolved into the night, replaced by a newfound understanding that unity was the only path forward. Their journey from despair to liberation had been fraught with peril, but it had also been a journey of self-discovery, a stark reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit could rise above the forces of oppression and cruelty. In the days that followed, as they settled into the comforting embrace of those who loved them, Phyllis and Sharon began to piece together the fragments of their harrowing experience. They spoke in hushed tones about the mysterious corridor, the broken window that had led them to it, and the eerie stillness that had pervaded that abandoned hospital hallway. Every detail was etched into their memories, a mosaic of terror and triumph that they vowed never to forget. Their escape was not merely a physical act of liberation, it was a symbol of resistance against a system that sought to control and subjugate them. Meanwhile, the question of their abductor's true identity lingered in the air like a specter. The enigma was compounded by the fact that, had the mastermind intended to keep them imprisoned, the path to freedom would have been entirely closed off. Instead, the calculated decision to let them go hinted at ulterior motives, a strategic maneuver designed to manipulate the events yet to come. Could it be that the abductor was merely a puppet, acting on orders from someone far more powerful? Or was this a test, a way to gauge the strength of character and resolve among those who had once been divided by enmity? In the quiet moments of reflection that followed their escape, Phyllis and Sharon began to sense that their ordeal was but one chapter in a far larger narrative, a narrative that involved hidden agendas, ruthless power plays, and a shadowy figure whose presence loomed over every twist and turn of their lives. The realization that the kidnapper might still be orchestrating events from behind the scenes filled them with a renewed sense of urgency. They knew that their newfound freedom could be short-lived if the true architect of their suffering was allowed to operate unchallenged. Yet, in that fleeting, bittersweet moment of liberation, as they held each other and embraced the warmth of reunion, Phyllis and Sharon chose to believe in the possibility of change. They resolved to confront the darkness that still threatened to envelop their lives, to forge a path defined not by vengeance or bitterness, but by courage, compassion, and the unwavering belief that every soul deserved a chance at redemption. Their journey was far from over, and the mysteries that still lay ahead were as daunting as they were intriguing. But for now, they had tasted freedom, and that was enough to kindle a hope that would guide them through the trials to come. In the midst of it all, the lingering question remained unanswered: who was behind the kidnapping, and what hidden agenda drove the elusive mastermind to spare them? As Genoa City braced for the next chapter in its relentless saga of power and intrigue, one thing was undeniable: the delicate balance between captivity and freedom, hate and love, was a battlefield where every decision carried the weight of destiny. And in that silent, unresolved mystery lay the promise of a future where the echoes of past enmities might finally give way to the light of a new dawn. Nick's enigmatic smile curled at the corners of his lips as he watched Phyllis and Sharon step into freedom. There was an almost imperceptible glint in his eyes, a knowing look that suggested he had foreseen this very outcome long before it transpired. His expression was one of calm satisfaction rather than surprise, as if the chaos that had ensued was merely a predictable ripple in the endless tide of Genoa City's turbulent dramas. Phyllis, still bristling with the intensity of her ordeal, was determined to set the record straight. The audacity of their captor leaving them to escape had ignited a fierce resolve in her. "I will not allow a kidnapper to roam free," she declared, her voice as steely as the shattered glass of the window through which they had fled. "He must be held accountable for his mistakes. There will be consequences, and I intend to see that justice is served." For Phyllis, whose life had been a tapestry of strength interwoven with moments of vulnerability, this was more than a mere escape, it was a turning point. As she exchanged a glance with Sharon, a silent pact was forged between them. They would no longer be the passive victims of someone else's ruthless designs. Instead, they would join forces, pooling their courage and wits, to exact revenge on the man who had dared to toy with their lives. In the days that followed, Phyllis and Sharon immersed themselves in a meticulously crafted plan, a plan fueled by both anger and a desperate need to reclaim control over their destinies. Their collaboration was unexpected. Once, bitterness and rivalry had threatened to keep them apart, but now, the shared experience of their captivity had melted away old enmities. Their alliance was as fierce as it was fragile, built on the understanding that survival often demands both unity and a relentless pursuit of retribution. They began by challenging the established order in subtle yet significant ways. Late-night meetings in the secrecy of abandoned rooms, coded messages exchanged over secure lines, and an intricate network of informants allowed them to gather intelligence on every move their mysterious adversary made. Each discovery only deepened their resolve. Every small victory in their covert operations, whether it was intercepting a critical document or unmasking a mole within the ranks of their enemy's inner circle, became a stepping stone toward a grander, more personal act of vengeance. Nick, who had always maintained a delicate balance between being a catalyst for change and an enigmatic bystander, now found himself in an increasingly precarious position. His early smile, which had hinted at prescience and cunning, began to waver as he contemplated the evolving situation. The more he supported Phyllis and Sharon's escape, the more he began to worry about his own fate. Was his involvement, however indirect, a betrayal of the power structures that governed Genoa City? Would his actions, seen as doing good by the women he had always subtly protected, eventually lead to his own incarceration? In his private moments of reflection, Nick's thoughts were fraught with uncertainty. He had long prided himself on being a master strategist, capable of predicting the moves of those around him like pieces on a chessboard. Yet the alliances and loyalties in this latest drama were as shifting and unpredictable as the sands of time. His secret smile, once a mask of assured control, now carried the weight of impending consequences. If his covert support for Phyllis and Sharon were ever uncovered, the repercussions could be devastating, not only for him but for the fragile network of alliances that held Genoa City's intricate power dynamics together. Meanwhile, Phyllis and Sharon's rebellion was not without its own inner conflicts. Despite their united front against the mastermind behind their abduction, there were moments when the intensity of their shared trauma led to a clash of wills. They challenged each other at every turn, each determined to prove that her approach was the right one, that her vision of justice was unassailable. These challenges, though seemingly petty, were manifestations of deep-seated scars left by years of betrayal and heartache. Yet, in the crucible of adversity, their bond only grew stronger, tempered by fire and refined through mutual respect and understanding. Every day, as they moved closer to unmasking their captor and orchestrating their ultimate act of vengeance, Phyllis and Sharon found solace in the knowledge that they were no longer isolated. They had become symbols of defiance in a city where power was wielded like a weapon, and their struggles resonated with countless others who had suffered under the oppressive shadow of their adversaries. Their journey from captivity to liberation, from bitterness to a burning desire for retribution, was an inspiration, a rallying cry for those who believed that even in the darkest moments, the human spirit could triumph over tyranny. Yet, amidst the escalating tension, the question of responsibility and accountability loomed large. The mastermind behind their kidnapping remained shrouded in mystery, a ghost in the machine whose motives were as inscrutable as they were sinister. Why would someone orchestrate such a calculated act of cruelty and then allow his captives to slip away into the arms of those who sought justice? The very act of leaving them free was a paradox, a signal that the abductor had a plan that extended far beyond simple retribution. Was it a strategic maneuver to sow confusion among his enemies? Or perhaps a twisted test of loyalty and resolve, designed to reveal the true character of those who dared to defy him? As the days turned into nights filled with hushed planning and furtive glances over darkened shoulders, Nick's concern grew. The city's rumor mill churned with tales of secret alliances and impending upheaval. It became increasingly clear that the ripple effects of Phyllis and Sharon's escape were far-reaching. Every conversation carried the possibility of betrayal, every friendly smile masked ulterior motives, and every alliance was as fragile as glass. The pressure mounted, and Nick found himself torn between his duty to maintain order and his personal empathy for the two women whose liberation had rekindled a spark of hope in a seemingly hopeless landscape. The looming threat of discovery haunted him. Each step he took, every decision he made, was colored by the fear that his actions in favor of Phyllis and Sharon might eventually be exposed. Would the powerful forces that controlled Genoa City, and by extension the very life he had built, see him as a traitor? The thought of imprisonment, of being cast out from the intricate web of influence he had so carefully woven, sent shivers down his spine. Yet even as these worries gnawed at him, Nick's resolve to stand by his convictions did not waver. In a world where allegiances shifted like shadows at dusk, he had made a choice that might one day demand the highest price. And so, the stage was set for a showdown, a confrontation that promised to unravel the threads of deceit that had long held Genoa City in its grip. Phyllis and Sharon, united by their ordeal and fueled by an unquenchable thirst for justice, prepared to launch their final act of retribution. Their plan was audacious, filled with risks that could either lead to their ultimate redemption or plunge them deeper into the labyrinth of treachery from which they had so desperately sought to escape. The very air in the city seemed charged with anticipation, as though the walls themselves whispered of an imminent reckoning. As they moved forward, their actions resonated like a rallying cry to the oppressed, a challenge to the status quo that had long been dominated by fear and manipulation. The tale of their escape, their alliance, and their unwavering pursuit of justice became a beacon for those who believed that no matter how dark the night, the dawn would eventually come. Even as Nick grappled with his inner turmoil, he could not help but marvel at the audacity and resilience of the women he had once seen as adversaries or, at best, pawns in a larger game. In the end, the complex interplay of power, loyalty, and ambition that had defined Genoa City was about to enter a new, unpredictable phase. Nick's enigmatic smile, once a mark of confident control, now carried the heavy burden of destiny. Phyllis and Sharon's pact of vengeance had ignited a spark that threatened to consume the established order. And in the shadowy corridors of power, the question of who would ultimately pay the price for betrayal, defiance, and the quest for freedom hung in the balance, a question that promised to reshape the future of a city built on secrets, lies, and the ceaseless struggle for justice. As the final pieces of the intricate puzzle began to fall into place, one thing remained certain: every choice, every act of rebellion, was a step toward an uncertain but necessary reckoning. Whether Nick would ultimately be seen as a hero or a traitor was a question for the future, a future in which the lines between right and wrong were as blurred as the shifting shadows in the corridors of power. And in that future, the legacy of Phyllis and Sharon's struggle would serve as a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit, a spirit that, when pushed to the brink, could rise to challenge even the mightiest of empires.